Now, in the comments of the last video, I was getting a lot of questions about the machines, and I actually just ended up pinning a post on there asking people to just directly ask their questions. So I've gone through and I've created a list of a bunch of questions that I want to go ahead and answer here now, just because I have access to these and I figure people are curious, so try and get as much information out there as I can. Now, a lot of the questions were kind of asking the same thing in different ways, so I'm going to lump a bunch of these together, but there were two questions we're going to go ahead and start out here with that were asked by people. So the first one, related to what we just did, asked by Marcel: how many machines can be connected for multiplayer? The answer is 4, but the manual confusingly says it can be 8, and it's actually more correct to maybe hold the fingers aside, because it says that it can be 8 machines that can be played with 4 sets of players each, which doesn't make any sense because the manual also states that each machine must have a unique ID, and you can only set these from 1 to 4. So I have no idea how that would work. And that's actually kind of disappointing as well, because the races have 16 boats and it's just Ethernet. I poked around these with Wireshark, but I really don't know what I'm doing with that. I'm not a network person, even though I use Linux, so don't read into this too much. But I did discover that these set static IPs that are like 192.168.200.10 and .11. So I'm guessing there's no other technical reason they couldn't have had more players. So I'm not really sure why they didn't. Maybe the machines just couldn't handle that much networking, or maybe the code wasn't up to the task of tracking that many players. I'm not sure. But the answer is, in reality, 4 people can be playing against each other with linked machines. Now, the next question by Thrashlord is: was it common in the 90s for arcade machines to have an actual IBM-based PC? And the operative word there is 90s, because the answer is yes for the late 90s and on, but before that, definitely not. Some history on arcades would actually help answer this. When arcade machines for video games were first coming around, they were dramatically better than what you could get at home. Take Pac-Man, for example. The arcade machine for that is really good, and it perfectly executes the game. But say the Atari 2600 port is not necessarily well received. So yeah, there was a disparity between what the arcades could do and what home consoles could do. But by the late 90s, early 2000s, and just beyond that, really, arcade machines and home computers and consoles had really reached parity, and there was no reason for the hardware to be different other than security stuff. But even that wasn't always that big of a deal. So yes, machines after a certain point would have pretty much all been the same. And there were even instances like the Sega Naomi that were basically just a game console in an arcade machine. So yeah, after a certain point, arcades and consoles and computers all just kind of became the same. All right, now for some more generic questions that are lumped together. One of the bigger ones I was asked is: will I be upgrading the machines? So they are just computers in there. It's got a slot 1 Celeron, 333 megahertz, 64 megabytes of RAM, 3 gigabyte hard drive, the network card, a Voodoo 2. And I had questions asking, ranging from everything to like, give it more RAM, go SSD, put in a Voodoo 3, give it a Pentium 2 that's even faster. And the reality is that I don't want to do any of that. I bought the arcade machines because I wanted the original authentic experience, and the more I modify them, the farther away I get from that. So the act of upgrading them is just modifying them away from what they should be. So I have absolutely no interest in changing them. And then the other thing is that they're really meant to do one thing, and they do that thing. They can't do the one thing that they were designed and built to do any better than we're designed and built to do it. I mean, there might be frame drops every now and then, but that's just the experience of playing this game. I don't really want to change it away from that. So I will not be doing any upgrades for the sake of performance. Now, I may switch to booting off of solid state media like compact flash cards for one of 2 reasons. The hard drives may die. As I mentioned in the previous video, I do actually want to continue to use the hard drives for as long as I can. Again, to me, that's just part of the experience, but they are a mechanical device that may wear out. So it's possible that they'll fail. I have already dumped the hard drive, so we'll get into that when I go to the archiving stuff. So they're safe, and I've tested it. I can write compact flash cards to boot, and we will check that out later too. So I'm not that concerned about it. If I have to switch to solid state media, I will, but I don't really want to. Another question that I got a lot related to that was, would I convert it to another machine or try and get other games to run on it? Now on the surface, it seems like it shouldn't be too difficult to do that, but there are several things that really make that not likely to happen. It's possible I could run off-road Thunder on there. If I got a copy of that hard drive, I might be able to just plug it in there and have it work. There wouldn't be a brake pedal. This might function as the throttle for that, which might be good enough, but I think that's maybe the only machine that would work. Turns out Arctic Thunder is using a later version of the arcade PC that would just be completely incompatible, so that wouldn't run. But normal computer games almost certainly would not run. So it is basically just a computer in there, but the video card is kind of weird. That Voodoo 2 has 10 megabytes of video memory. Normal consumer Voodoo 2s have 8 or 12 megabytes of video memory, and the video memory is structured in a particular way that I don't know that games would be able to adapt to on this machine. Additionally, from what I understand, that Voodoo 2 can only output 512 by 384, so it's not quite usable for regular gaming. And then there's the other problems, like you'd need to add a 2D card with a second monitor just so that you could boot and access stuff. So yeah, that wouldn't really be a great experience. So the other problem though is the input devices. These all run through the Diego board, which is serial of some kind, RS-232, RS-485, something, I'm not 100% sure. And no software is designed to use inputs connected over serial like that. So the controls wouldn't be usable. I would have to reverse engineer this, adapt it to GamePort or something, and that's just absolutely not something that I want to do. Next, related to the Diego board, were a lot of comments and questions and confusion related to the security and emulatability of the machine. So some arcade machines had really strict and sometimes insane security, like the Capcom Suicide Battery arcades. These are basically on the complete opposite end. They have almost no security whatsoever, if they have any at all, and I don't actually think they do. So the hard drives are not locked to the machines in any way, and I could definitely confirm that because I accidentally booted that machine with an image of that machine's hard drive. So yeah, they don't care. Additionally, there's nothing locked between the hard drive and the main board because I've been booting off of compact flash cards. I know that works just fine. The Voodoo 2s could probably be swapped. The only thing is that there is a security chip in there that the game tries to look for on the Voodoo 2. That's probably the only security mechanism that exists in the game. Because Quantum 3D made the Voodoo 2, it was pretty easy for them to add something in there. It's as like a security DRM thing. But that has already been bypassed, and you can go download a hacked executable for Hydro Thunder that removes that check. So you don't even need to worry about that. Outside of that, the game tries to access the Diego board for the inputs and the display output. That I don't think so much is a security step so much as it was just they needed to do that. So the Diego board would have to be emulated to try and get this running on something else. But there have been efforts to try and get the game to run on completely different hardware that have succeeded. So there is nothing that is locked down to any of the particular hardware in here. You can use a different Voodoo 2, different motherboard, sort of different sound card. The thing about that is that it's locked down to the Yamaha XG chipset, probably just because they use direct hardware calls to make that work. So you would have to get one of those sound cards to use with the machine if you're going to try and rebuild it in another computer. But the long and the short is that you could totally rebuild the entire computer in here with different hardware, and you should be able to get it to work. So the one security feature on the GPU has been bypassed already, and nothing else actually matters. So these are really not that locked down. I think the only reason these haven't been emulated in MAME is that it's gotta be a whole complicated PC thing. Really, I think we're just emulating the Yamaha XG sound card away from having PCEM or 86 box be able to emulate these games, and then coming up with some kind of wrapper to translate the inputs and video output for a virtual serial port. If I were trying to emulate the game, that's the direction I would go. All right, one last thing here is comments I got about the machines being dirty. I hate to break it to you, but these are actually pretty clean for arcade machines. The dashes could use a wet wipe. I haven't got to that yet because I've just been struggling to get the videos done themselves, but inside these are nearly pristine. You may have seen on the boards inside of there, it looks like there's a thin layer of dust. It's because it's particle board. The dust just gets trapped on the surface. It's very rough. If you wet cleaned that to try and get that out, you would just soak water into the boards and then it would just end up damaging them more. You are much better off just wiping or blowing the machines out to try and clean off the surface layer of dust and just letting everything else be, which I actually did before I brought these in here. I hosed them down with an air compressor and got a lot of other dust out that was loose. So yeah, these are pretty much as clean as they're going to be. When I go to work on the dashes, respectively, this one to fix the wobbly controls and this one to come up with a solution for the broken plastic, I will go ahead and clean them off. Because I knew I was going to be doing that later, I wasn't that worried about doing it during the initial setup. All right, now those are all the questions and comments that I can really respond to here by just relaying information to you.